Hey folks, welcome to Noodle Food. Today we are going to be talking about the coronavirus. Specifically, we're going to be talking about something most of the news articles I've seen covering the coronavirus don't hit on hard enough, and that is just how contagious this virus appears to be. This first chart I'm going to hit you with is comparing it to the SARS outbreak. If you look at the SARS outbreak, the infected population appears to have doubled about every 16 days. We'll look at this in more detail later. But if you look at the coronavirus, it appears to be doubling the infected population every 3 days. Now, if I were to just say it doubles every 3 days, doubles every 16 days, it doesn't sound like a huge deal. But over the same 16 days that it would have taken the 1,000 people with SARS to double into 2,000 people with SARS, the coronavirus would have grown to 40,000. So it's an enormous difference. So how do infectious diseases spread? Well, basically you have one person that has it, they give it to 2, the 2 give it to 4, and the 4 give it to 8. And basically what this means is every day or every week or every month, the amount that the infected population increases isn't linear. It depends on how many people had it in the previous cycle, the previous day, month, etc. And that's basically exponential growth. Now, how fast this exponential growth happens can change. And the time that it's going to take for that population to double is going to be dependent on a great many things. Some of the things, just to list a few, are the density of the population, the contagiousness of the virus, the behavior of the population, how well they keep themselves isolated, etc., efforts from society and government to quarantine and treat individuals, and then, of course, what medical technology we have. It's also going to depend on things like how much of the population already has been exposed or infected by the virus. So here we're going to talk about the SARS outbreak of 2003 and look at the real data. We're going to go ahead and calculate the time to double during the kind of peak period of exponential growth for this virus. And if you look in late March, we're at about 1,300 people infected. And about 11 days later, that doubles to 2,600 infected. And it takes about 21 days after that, so significantly longer, to double again to 5,200 infected. And it will never double again. The disease ends up getting controlled after this. But you can see it slowing down in this later period. And it was potentially even a bit higher in the very earliest period. If you take the average, what is the average time to double during this period of exponential growth? We'll just call this about 16 days to double. If we look at the Ebola outbreak of 2014, we're going to do the same calculation where we figure out time to double. If we look in late June, there's about 800 infected. About 35 days later, it has doubled to 1,600 infected. And about 20 days after that, it's doubled to 3,200 infected. About 30 days after that, it's doubled to 6,400 infected. And about 36 days after that, you can see it's slowing down maybe a tiny bit. It's doubled again to 12,800 infected. So if we average all these out, it's about 30 days to double for the Ebola virus. So now we're going to talk about the recent coronavirus outbreak in China, which is now spreading basically all over Asia and then in other parts of the world as well. The first case was in kind of early mid-December. But in January, it's really been taking off. And if we're going to do the same calculation to look at how quickly the infected population is doubling. If we look on January 21st, we can see that there's 500 officially diagnosed cases. About 2 days later, there's 1,000 cases. About 1 day later, there's another 2,000 cases total. About 2 days after that, it's doubled again to 4,000. And 2 days after that, it's doubled again to 8,000. 3.5 days later, it's doubled again to 16,000. And so far, the total number of reported cases has not yet reached 32,000. I think the latest count is 29,000. But the last day appears to have flattened off. And I don't know if this is an issue with the last day of data, or if indeed the disease appears to be much more under control. So if we average all these numbers together, though, what do we get? We get about 2.5 days to double. And with that, I want to take us back to this first chart. Because that number right there, how quickly this virus appears to be doubling, is what seems to be setting it apart from all the other outbreaks we've seen so far. It could be more intrinsic to the virus itself. It also could have to do with the fact that this virus is happening in one of the most densely populated places on Earth. But regardless, it's a phenomenally fast rate of exponential growth. Now we're going to talk about a much more sensitive topic. Is potentially the coronavirus underreported? There are, of course, reports in the media that China has been clamping down, trying to control the information about the outbreak. It's not hard to imagine a reason why they would want to do this. They certainly want to convince the population and the rest of the world that the situation is under control. Whether it is or isn't under control, I think remains to be seen. And they probably also want to prevent an outright panic, which you can, I think, certainly understand. That being said, if you Google or YouTube leaked videos from inside of China for the coronavirus, you will see several videos which suggest the situation is potentially much worse than the official numbers suggest. But it's very hard to assess those and to say how much you should trust them or not. So rather than that, what I want to do is I want to focus on a report by the Johns Hopkins team. And what they did was they basically looked at the disease characteristics, how likely the disease is to spread from one person to another, how many people it's likely to spread to per person infected, how long the disease incubates, how long somebody's infected, how long until they recover, and then they kind of take those disease characteristics and then they map it onto kind of a model where they have all the Chinese cities and this kind of network, and then diseases can spread from one city to another. And then based on that, they come up with this curve. And this curve says, here's the number of cases that we expect to kind of have in China based on when the initial infection was here in early, sometime in early December. The cases were only caught, I think, December 8th, but I think there were a few people that were caught with it, so it's suspected that the actual first cases were a bit earlier than that. Anyway, if we look at this model, it suggests there are a lot more people that are infected than the current actual reported cases are. And the other thing we can see when we look at the model is, even though the model is very complicated, taking into account all sorts of things, we can simplify it and just say that they found there was a doubling about every 10 days. And that's kind of the exponential growth they have factored in based on all the things that they plugged into it. If we go back and we look at what was the actual exponential growth rate that we see in the reported data, it's much faster, much, much faster than 10 days. So we're then left with a bit of a conundrum. How is it that for all this period, the growth rate was significantly less than the model, yet the reported cases stayed so low? But now, once the reported cases are kind of starting to pile in, the growth rate is much, much higher than this. There's a few options. One is that they've been suppressing the information until they realize they can't. And so now the extent of the outbreak, they have to start acknowledging it. But it's not clear what the actual, if this is the case, it's not clear how much they're acknowledging it compared to the actual size of the problem. It's also possible that during this period of time, they had enough infrastructure and medical facilities and whatnot to contain the virus and to prevent it from spreading. But as they've been slowly fighting this battle, they've been slowly losing, and now it's reached a critical point where it's potentially breaking out of the ability of the medical system in China to control it, and that's why we're seeing it start to kind of skyrocket at this high rate. So that is another potential interpretation. I think it's very difficult to make an assessment about what the real situation is like. To do it, you probably need to triangulate it from looking at a bunch of different things. But I think what it is safe to say is that it's a very, very serious situation indeed, just based off of this phenomenal growth rate that we see. And hopefully, the Chinese authorities and the Chinese people will figure out a way to get this outbreak under control, so that we can see basically the S-curve part of this, which is where it starts leveling off at the end as the disease stops spreading. It cannot come soon enough for the people of China. I just wanted to share this because I think it does put the coronavirus in an interesting light. Thank you for watching.